Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. In a UN Security Council meeting, the Russian and Chinese government or their representatives accuse Western countries of neo-colonialism. They say that they use their veto rights and they abstain from things in order to promote this neo-colonialism idea and take control over countries, especially when they really need help, so that they can get control of those countries and get to push the ideals that they want onto those countries. Well, when we look back at China and the Russian Federation, then that they do the same thing with the. We may not be able to call it neo-colonialism. We may have a different word for it. While that word right at this moment eludes me. But when we look at the reasoning behind why Vladimir Putin attacked Ukraine over a year ago, we're almost coming up to 2 years on the attack that the Russian Federation made on the Ukrainian nation, is also follows the same ideals that they're accusing Western countries of, that they're just trying to get control of a country because they want control of it, because they want resources, they want the ports, they want what that country has, and they don't really want to make a trade for it. Share power in order to utilize that port. They just want to take it over. In China, they actually have a whole province that is kind of its own little prison because no one can get in or out of it. And resources are limited to food, especially food, water, and medical resources are limited to this particular province because it has Muslim people who want to follow Islam and follow the ways of Muhammad and worship God the way that they do in that province, and they're attempting to use these limited resources to kill people off. One of the issues with colonialism in general is that it comes with a level of genocide. And that genocide is used by those controlling countries to get control of the people who are there. If you ask those countries that were taken over by the British Empire, which does represent, of course, England, the United Kingdom, or Great Britain, however you want to put it, the United States, Canada, and several other countries that they say have escaped the British Empire, but there's still remnants of it left. Very few countries have been able to completely escape without leaving the indigenous people behind. In the indigenous people, simply put, are left behind in a destitute way. They're left in starvation. They're left without resources. So, yeah, the Russian Federation, as a representative, as he's speaking about how Western governments handle things, yeah, there is a point of control. There's a point of genocide. And that neo-colonialism that he's talking about. But the Russian Federation and the Chinese government are just as guilty of the same things. The point is the United Nations was formed so that countries couldn't do some of what we actually see happen today in countries. And when we have control the way it's being distributed, and power the way it's being distributed, that sometimes the simple person, the person who just wants to live day to day and really doesn't report to any huge government office or government sector job, gets left behind. And we, as the simple people, we need to speak up so that we can get heard. So, why don't we listen to what was actually said on the United Nations Security Council floor in New York City, how they actually discussed it, and along with that, there's going to be another report from press report from the United Nations Press Center in New York City, as they discuss other needs around the world and who actually is offering the largest amount of help towards that.
Countries which have achieved significant success in stabilizing the situation on their territory have been demonstratively ignored in this, just as their legitimate concerns are persistently ignored. And our actions were respectful when it came to Mali. We note with regret the Council's gradual loss of capacity for constructive discussion and negotiation. Instead of looking for solutions to complex problems, which truly does require both time and a willingness to compromise, Western states often deliberately choose the simplest path forward, which provokes the use of the veto or abstention on documents. And again, a fresh example of this is the situation with Mali sanctions, when our repeated and persistent calls to the pen holders to take a constructive approach and turn on their brains were simply ignored. And please don't tell us about the painstaking efforts that you made to negotiate the Mali resolution. Those efforts consisted of fully ignoring the concerns of that country. I'll let you in on a little secret. One of the permanent members of the council said in closed consultations that we are the Security Council and we do what we want, not what the country wants. Is this not a blatant example of a neo-colonial approach? I would also like to stress one more thing. The issue of the right of the veto does not fall under working methods. It is rather the cornerstone of the entire Security Council architecture and the gauge to achieving balanced decisions in the Council. Yet This, however, does not obviate the need for working methods and approaches that would contribute to the achievement of compromises. There needs to be a will to negotiate, to demonstrate wisdom and pragmatism, as well as to listen and to heed other colleagues in the Council. Yet, other Western colleagues in the Council are quick to criticize the use of the veto, while they modestly fail to mention the fact that they don't even require this veto, because what they have in their pocket is really 8 votes, and they use those votes, which is essentially a hidden veto, without having to resort to the real veto. That is why the Security Council does not need an expansion through the addition of other like-minded Western members. A preferred tactic of our Western colleagues has become the use of accusations in absentia, pitting labels, sabotage, diktat, manipulation. On some issues, such as Ukraine, the Council has long turned into a platform for voicing the most absurd fakes and propaganda from Western states. What's more, the opinion of the West is categorically put forward as the only correct one. Does such a destructive approach contribute to Council unity? Hardly. In this context, the issue of penholdership of certain dossiers becomes more and more relevant. Only 3 delegations continue to act as penholders on most issues. Despite their long-lost status of colonial empires, they have become convinced of their own exclusivity and believe themselves to be regional experts and patronize other states and even entire regions. The views of host countries, regional stakeholders who are often more on top of the situation on the ground, and sometimes even representatives of the Secretariat themselves, are completely ignored. Another relevant example of the abuse of penholder status is the methodology for negotiating Council resolutions. Work is often carried out under artificial time pressure, which does not allow for experts to carry out a comprehensive study of documents. And in order to obtain desired results during the votes, our Western colleagues have now begun using the tactic of putting unprecedented pressure on countries that disagree on the basis of the principle, whoever is not with us is against us. And what do we have in the end, dear colleague? More and more half-baked documents that do not account for the key concerns of Council members, give unclear instructions to the Secretariat, and are often unrealistic in their goals and objectives. This approach is not conducive to effective conflict resolution, and what's worse, it undermines the authority of the UN Security Council. We have consistently advocated expanding the circle of penholders primarily through non-permanent members. At the same time, we are guided by the provision in Presidential Note 507 that any member of the Council can be a penholder and more than one member can be a co-penholder. We attach particular importance here to the views of African states. We are convinced that reviewing the issue of penholdership will contribute to increasing the efficiency of the work of the Council. In this regard, we welcome the launch, with our active participation, of an ongoing discussion of this issue in the Council's informal group on working methods. We will continue to engage constructively with interested colleagues to negotiate a draft note on penholdership. We have consistently drawn attention to the Council's excessive documentation workload. The Council produces several hundred documents annually, and the added value of some of them is unfortunately doubtful. Other imbalances include a regularly noted excessive passion for micromanaging resolutions. We have always consistently stated that the final products of the Council should be clear, concise, easy to understand, and most importantly, action-oriented. The question of the optimal ratio of open to closed sessions of the Council remains relevant. Russia continues to advocate for maintaining a balance between the two, but we see that some members of the Council, while loudly clamoring about maximum transparency when discussing some country issues, in fact, use them exclusively for propaganda shows and prefer to keep the consideration of sensitive or inconvenient topics behind closed doors. In conclusion, I cannot fail to note the already sore point of inviting briefers to meetings of the Council to speak on various topics. Persistent attempts by Western colleagues to censor the participation of briefers who, in their opinion, do not meet certain Western criteria, but who are in reality simply not prepared to sing to their tune, and have an alternative view of various international problems simply do not stand up to scrutiny. Unfortunately, we have also seen cases of insults to speakers who express a non-Western position and even personal attacks. Such actions are unacceptable and do not contribute to an objective and balanced discussion. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席先生。主席。
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I'd like to congratulate Albania for being the president of this month of the Security Council. I also thank the United States for serving as president for the Council in August. Regarding the item today, I'd like to thank Ambassador Hocha for his briefing. Since 2010, the Security Council has held open debates annually to discuss how to improve its working methods. There is much value to this practice. China welcomes the participation of non-council members at this meeting today. Working methods, as a reflection of thinking methods, have never been and never will be mere technicalities. The work of the Security Council is highly political, and its working methods, therefore, will have to be approached from a political perspective. In connection with the prominent issues at the Security Council, I wish to make the following points. First, the Council should focus on its core mandate. The world is facing fast-emerging crises and challenges. The Council must carry out its mandate, but it is unable to take on too much. Hence, the need to focus its energies on addressing major issues that threaten peace and security. We do not support thematic issues hogging excessive resources and overlapping and redundancy between the Council and other UN bodies. Furthermore, we oppose the practice of individual members out of political motives pushing for the discussion of country-specific human rights issues at the Council. Second, the Security Council should be results-oriented and committed to solving practical issues. The meetings, statements, and documents of the Council are means to an end, not the end. Holding a meeting does not mean an issue is resolved. The same is true for holding more meetings, which sometimes turn out to be counterproductive. We could begin by taking small steps to improve the Council's efficiency and effectiveness. The documents we adopt should be readable and practical, and a resolution should avoid routinely running to 10+ pages. The Council currently meets on the Syrian issue 2 to 3 times a month. With most of the members repeating their established positions, we could well reduce the frequency of deliberations or combining different tracks. The practice of the A3 of making joint statements is both time-saving and impactful. This practice is commendable and learned by other security members, council members. Third, regarding the dynamics among council members, at the center of the Council's myriad working methods lies the core principle of solidarity and unity. Council members should show mutual respect, consult one another as equals, and accommodate each other's concerns. Instead of only paying attention to public effect and then talking to the camera alone, we should listen attentively to one another, enhance mutual understanding, and make an effort to seek consensus. China is in favor of holding more informal consultations. We also support the Security Council in enhancing its engagement and communication with the countries concerned, SRSGs, and non-council members. Fourth, the Security Council should demonstrate inclusiveness in its work. We support the Council in continuing to invite civil society briefers. That said, The recent situation also flagged the need to improve quality control over the briefing content to deliver true value added. In this regard, presidencies should take up the responsibility. As it stands today, we are concerned that some members only seem to care about bringing different voices to the Council without thinking about how to reach consensus. They seem to only care about responding to the non-governmental group's observations and deliberately neglect the concerns of the governments of the countries concerned. On sanctions, China always maintains that the Council should approach sanctions in a prudent and responsible manner, carefully control their intensity and scope, and adjust or lift them to reflect changes on the ground. It is regrettable that over the past 20-odd years, sanctions, once established, tend to be protracted and expanded, making their reversal near impossible. Sanctions can neither replace diplomacy nor serve as a tool for some countries to exert political pressure. The Council sanctions on countries such as Sudan, South Sudan, Dakar, and Guinea-Bissau, as well as sanctions imposed under the SC Resolution 1988, have become obsolete, and the process of lifting them should be initiated ASAP. In addition to the above-mentioned points, I want to highlight penholdership, an issue that has become so controversial that its reform cannot wait any longer. Penholdership comes out of practice. It is not regulated by the rules of procedure. The reality is that a small number of permanent Council members have long monopolized the penholdership on the majority of issues, with individual penholders sometimes placing their national positions above this collective body, which has become the root cause of many issues. Penholdership must be adjusted to reflect equity, equality, and openness. In this regard, we need to have more African members to serve as penholders on African issues. That African members cannot serve as penholders is unjustifiable. We should let more non-permanent members to serve as penholders, and they are fully capable of serving as penholders. Over the past 2 years, the UAE has consulted with all members patiently and has facilitated the Council's adoption by consensus of many important documents regarding the issue of Afghanistan, which has served as a great example. Existing penholders should honestly discharge their responsibility. Penholdership as volunteered services is a responsibility, not a prerogative. Serving as penholders requires abiding by objectivity and impartiality, and it comes with the duty to prioritize maintaining solidarity and forging consensus. At the same time, we need to seriously study the arrangement of penholdership and make appropriate reform. Judging from the job it actually does, the name penholder is highly misleading, because in the Security Council practices, the role a penholder plays goes far beyond taking notes or drafting documents. The UNGA has co-facilitators for its major processes. The Security Council could learn from the UNGA and consider arranging 3 coordinators for each agenda item from among both permanent and non-permanent members. Chairs of the subsidiary bodies should also be invited to act as penholders for their mandated issues, which would be a true demonstration of joint responsibility and participation. In short, the issue of penholdership deserves great attention and serious treatment. We are aware that the Council's Working Group on Documentation and other procedural questions is already engaged in relevant discussions. We hope that the current and incoming chairs of the IWG will prioritize the reform of the penholdership arrangement and expedite its substantive improvements. Mr. President, improving the working methods is integral to the Security Council reform. China has consistently supported reasonable and necessary reform of the SC, giving priority to increasing the representation and voice of developing countries, and in particular making special arrangements to give priority to the demands of Africa. We are willing to work with member states to keep IGN as the main channel and to seek a package solution through patient and democratic consultations. The ultimate goal of political reform is for the Council to be better, not worse, to move forward, not backward, and for the general membership, not just a few countries, to benefit. It must be noted that the use of the veto is closely related to the imbalance in the composition of the Council. Many members of the Council belong to the same political grouping, which often takes advantage of its numerical strength to dominate the Council's agenda and often pushes for a vote by skipping extensive consultations, which ultimately leads to the use of the veto. If we only look at the use of the veto and ignore the unfairness and irrationality of the Council's composition and the working methods, we will not be able to correctly grasp and address the root causes of the problem. In conclusion, I'd like to reiterate that China stands ready to work with all parties to draw lessons from our past experience, develop new ideas, and take practical action to promote continuous improvements in the work of the Security Council so as to better safeguard international peace and security. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is my honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the 10 elected members of the Security Council. We commend Albania for organizing this debate and Ambassador Ferit Hoxha for his briefing in his capacity as chair of the informal working group on documentation and other procedural questions. Under your leadership, the IWG adopted last year its first annual program of work and its annual report, facilitating activities in the execution of its mandate, guided by the principles of openness, dialogue, and inclusivity. The informal working group also adopted the first set of selected indicators with the goal of enhancing awareness and improving the implementation of existing working methods. A primary goal of the E10, which is to make the implementation of Note 507 measurable. We commend the digitalization of Note 507 in the interactive handbook sponsored by Japan, which is a major goal of the E10, which contributes to increasing awareness. Note 507 is a living document and it requires continuous review. In this regard, drafting new notes by the President as necessary in response to current needs is crucial for the Council's effectiveness. At the same time, it is equally important that the Council review, update, and streamline those which no longer are in keeping with the current reality and interests of the more efficient and effective Council. As elected members, we take seriously our responsibilities and obligations entrusted to us through our election by the United Nations General Assembly. We aspire to and are committed to a Council that lives up to its mandate under the Charter and that is able to tackle the complex and interconnected threats to peace and security that we collectively face. There is a wide-ranging recognition of the need to encourage more meaningful and effective participation of elected members in the drafting of outcome documents for this body. The legitimacy and effectiveness of the Council have much to gain from a more inclusive and transparent penholdership practice. The E10 have consistently shown the value added that they can bring as pen holders and co-pen holders. Further enhancement of the working methods is needed to ensure equal opportunity for all council members and to guarantee that all interested elected members act as pen holders and co-pen holders in line with the objective of ensuring inclusive, fair, and timely drafting processes. To this end, the E10 has put forward a proposal in the form of a note of the President of the Security Council that encourages a more equitable role for elected members and recognizes that value added may include, but shall not be limited to, expertise and contributions, regional perspectives, chairing of relevant subsidiary bodies, and special interests. We hope that this proposal can be swiftly adopted because it represents a shared view and the aspiration of the larger UN membership. We will also continue supporting efforts to improve best practices of penholders through periodic reflections of the IWG on specific products issued by the Council. And we will also continue supporting the negotiations and the adoption of a note by the President aimed at enhancing these practices. We underscore that it is of paramount to ensure that all Council members have adequate opportunities to participate, fully engage, discuss, contribute to the negotiations, and influence the decisions of the Council. In this regard, sufficient time should be provided, and not less than 24 hours, for consideration of products placed under silence procedure, and avoid, when possible, sending drafts over the weekend. Mr. President, we affirm the statement contained in document PRST/2021/23, and we reiterate that the Council should strengthen its commitment with the wider UN membership and cooperation, interaction with the General Assembly and other UN bodies, notably the Peacebuilding Commission, the PBC. That also means more opportunities for all member states on behalf of whom the Security Council acts, in accordance with Article 24.1 of the UN Charter, to interact with the Council. The Council should actively seek the valuable advice that the PBC can provide, including on preventative diplomacy and cooperation with local actors, regional and sub-regional organizations, in country-specific, regional, and thematic files. The PBC is uniquely placed to enrich the discussion of mandates and to provide valuable advice and cross-cutting perspectives. The working methods of the PBC should be enhanced and improved. We welcome the relevant recommendation set forth in the new Agenda for Peace. Similarly, Security Council missions to the field have proven to be a valuable tool for the Council to understand, assess, and prevent escalation of specific conflicts or situations. We commit to and call on all Council presidencies to circulate and implement monthly working method commitments. We underline the joint working method commitments of the A3 as a reflection of how elected members bring fresh perspectives and innovative ideas to the table, and we also seek to promote interactive discussions during consultations and praise the efforts of the Council members as Presidency of the Month, as initiated by Japan, to revitalize the discussion at consultations. We also praise the United Arab Emirates for the inclusion of the international sign interpretation during its presidency in June. We would like to thank SCAD for the live list of speakers made available for open debates as requested by the E10, and we commend Mozambique for initiating the practice of circulating it. Mr. President, the Council needs to strike a healthy balance between public and private meetings to both enhance the transparency and visibility of the Council's work and to encourage more interactivity of discussions and consensus building. To this end, we support efforts undertaken to agree on elements to be communicated by the Presidency after closed consultations. We value area formula meetings as a means for Council members to engage informally with diverse actors and the broader membership. In that regard, in principle and in practice, the streaming of area formula meetings on UN Web TV should not face objections when requested by the organizers. We also believe that transparency and accountability of the Council should be enhanced regarding the documentation addressed to it by UN member states. The provision and accessibility of information and Council documentation, including from previous years, to elected members needs to improve. The full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in the work of the Council remains a priority. We insist on the need for integrating gender perspectives across the working methods. The shared commitments on women, peace, and security adopted by a majority of its members show important progress, and we encourage sustained efforts. We also encourage UN briefers to integrate women, peace, and security issues into their briefings. We strongly believe that the perspective of civil society, where relevant, bring an added value to Council deliberations, and therefore they must be supported and sustained. We stress the importance of the Council striving for consensus when inviting civil society briefers. The Council as a whole should be responsible for their suitability and safety and must condemn all cases of reprisals. To that end, the E10 encourages further discussion, including on how to promote best practices, including the possibility of discussing guidelines. Mr. President, targeted sanctions by the Council are an important tool to address threats to international peace and security. They are therefore critical to the execution of the mandate of this Council. We underscore the importance of accountability and transparency in the work of subsidiary bodies. These working methods should align with international due process standards and should be continually improved. We strongly believe in the need to strengthen fairness and clarity of UN sanction procedures, thereby increasing the effectiveness of UN sanctions regimes. Listing and delisting individuals and entities under UN sanctions regimes should be objective and evidence-based. We acknowledge the contribution of the Office of the Ombudsperson in providing an independent review mechanism for delisting requests in the 1267 Daesh and Al-Qaeda sanctions regime, and we stress the need to continue efforts to improve its work. The E10 would like to reiterate its belief that the establishment and improvement of independent review mechanisms would strengthen the rule of law in UN sanctions regimes, taking into account the unique context of sanctions. Panels of experts can provide valuable reporting on the implementation, evasion, and circumvention of UN sanctions. The Council should work to make sure that panel experts have full access for their important investigations and are not restricted in the achievement of their mandate. As conflicts evolve, so too should our collective responses. The Council should take into account the efficacy of sanctions through these evolving phases of conflicts. It should also ensure that sanctions are not intended to have adverse humanitarian consequences for civilian populations, nor adversely affect humanitarian activities carried out by humanitarian organizations. In this regard, we welcome the adoption of Resolution 2664 of the year 2022, which introduced cross-cutting humanitarian exemptions for United Nations sanctions regimes, and we underline the need for its implementation at the national level. The provisions introduced by paragraph 1 of Resolution 2664 should continue to apply to the 1267/1989/2253 ISIL, Daesh, and Al-Qaeda sanctions regime. We further note the importance of the role of the sanctions committees in the effective implementation of Resolution 2664, in assisting member states in their understanding of the resolution and in monitoring implementation. On the appointment by the SG of his special representatives, we stress the need for more transparent consultations with each E10 member on an individual basis to allow enough time for our due consideration. Mr. President, the E10 members underscore the critical and urgent need for comprehensive Security Council reform so that the Council reflects contemporary realities. While the Council needs to be more effective, representative, legitimate, transparent, accountable, and democratic, it continues to lack a truly representative composition. Improving the working methods of the Council is a prerequisite for a more effective Council. Working methods are also one of the clusters of the intergovernmental negotiations on Security Council reform. We welcome the letters addressed this year by the co-chairs of that process to the chair of the IWG and the recommendations of the General Assembly, including on issues related to its working methods, notably those recommendations contained in the resolutions on the revitalization of the work of the General Assembly. Mr. President, since the last working methods debate, the Council failed to adopt 4 resolutions due to the use of the veto. The use or threat of use of the veto may prevent the Council from acting on vital topics. The E10 calls for restraint on the use of the veto, especially on actions aimed to preventing mass atrocities. The E10 also calls for restraint on other forms of veto in the subsidiary bodies of the Council and urges openness to compromise, particularly in those cases where needless objections might impede the work of the organs or of the panel or group of experts and related processes. It is highly encouraging that the IWG recently adopted 2 notes of the President on the minute of silence and on the distribution of chairs and vice chairs of subsidiary bodies. The contingency measures of the latter should never be interpreted as if we have time until the end of January without reaching an agreement. We must make every effort to agree provisionally on the appointment of the chairs of subsidiary bodies for the following year, no later than October 1st. We deeply regret that the absence of chairs appointments significantly delayed the work of subsidiary bodies. Prolonged negotiations create unnecessary difficulties for incoming council members who need to prepare for the responsibilities they assume. Importantly, we believe that there should be due respect for any consensus proposal by elected members. We stress the importance of completing the process in a timely manner. And we would further highlight the E10 role in the distribution of chairmanships for 2023. We reiterate the letters circulated by Ecuador on behalf of the E10 on 27 January 2023, as contained in document S/2023/68, unanimously supporting Japan as the chair of the IWG in 2024. To conclude, we, the 10 elected members of the Security Council, speak with one voice to reaffirm our commitment today to live up to the responsibility bestowed upon us through our election by the members of the United Nations, to work together towards a more transparent, inclusive, and representative council for all, and a more effective one with a view to contributing to international peace and security. Thank you very much.
In Nairobi this morning, the Secretary General spoke at the Africa Climate Summit. He said that an injustice burns at the heart of the climate crisis, and its flame is scorching hopes and possibilities in Africa. He underscored that the continent accounts for less than 4% of global emissions, and yet it suffers some of the worst effects of rising global temperatures. The Secretary General made a strong appeal for large emitters, namely the G20 countries that are meeting in New Delhi later this week, to commit to reaching net zero emissions as close as possible to 2040. Assume your responsibilities, he told them. The Secretary General also said that we must all work together for Africa to become a renewable energy superpower. Africa can be at the heart of a renewable future, he said. And he also had a press encounter at the summit in which he reiterated his call to reform the outdated, unfair, and dysfunctional global financial system. And he's now on his way to the ASEAN-UN summit in Indonesia. This morning, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, spoke on behalf of the Secretary General at the closing of the General Assembly's 77th session. She commended the stewardship of its president, Shaba Korosi, adding that the 77th session of the General Assembly has kept diplomacy, dialogue, and debate alive, and worked towards real solutions for people and planet alike. She will also address the opening of the 78th session at 3 p.m. this afternoon. The Secretary General is concerned about the escalation of hostilities in northeast Syria, which reportedly killed and injured dozens of civilians and caused damage to critical civilian infrastructure. The Secretary General strongly condemns all violence in Syria and urges all parties to respect their obligations under international law. He recalls that civilians and civilian infrastructure must be protected under international humanitarian law. The Secretary General urges all parties to exercise maximum restraint to prevent further regional escalation. Further on that, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warns about an escalation in hostilities in the Deir ez-Zor governorate. Humanitarian workers and partners report that since the 27th of August, at least 54 civilians have been killed, including 4 children. Critical public infrastructure has also been damaged, including 2 hospitals and 3 water treatment facilities. Partners on the ground have called on all parties to facilitate free and unimpeded movement and take measures to prevent attacks on health facilities and other civilian infrastructure. Meanwhile, an uptick in hostilities across Idlib and northern Aleppo governorates has killed 4 civilians, including 2 children, and injured dozens of others. At least 500 families have been displaced. The UN and its partners are closely monitoring the situation and continue to deliver assistance as needed. Turning to Mali, yesterday, El Hassamouane, the head of our peacekeeping mission in the country, MINUSMA, visited Tessilit and Agalhok in the Kidal region. This was part of the drawdown and withdrawal process of the peacekeeping mission in the country. Over the next weeks, uniformed personnel will begin to leave the mission's bases in these locations, which will be closed as part of the second phase of the drawdown plan. While in Tessilit and Agalhok, Mr. Wan conveyed his gratitude to the peacekeepers. He paid tribute to their contributions, including to a large number from the Chadian contingent. Mr. Wan also met with local stakeholders, including municipal authorities and civil society, and acknowledged their collaboration, which enabled the mission to implement its mandate in the Kidal region. As Mr. Wan reminded the Security Council last week, the second phase of MINUSMA's drawdown will be challenging, with the mission's convoys scheduled to travel long distances in a difficult and insecure terrain. The Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, has released $125 million from the UN's Central Emergency Response Fund to boost underfunded humanitarian operations in 14 countries in Africa, Asia, the Americas, and the Middle East. This year's global humanitarian funding requirements have surpassed $55 billion, but it's less than 30% funded. Today's allocations will help scale up humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan and Yemen, Burkina Faso, Mali, Myanmar, Haiti, Venezuela, the Central African Republic, Mozambique, Cameroon, the occupied Palestinian territories, and Malawi. The allocation will also support refugee operations in Bangladesh and Uganda. With this additional funding, SURF has allocated a record $270 million so far this year through its underfunded emergencies window. This is the largest annual amount ever apportioned to the highest number of countries, a reflection of skyrocketing humanitarian needs. Turning to Ukraine, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that civilians were injured and civilian infrastructure, including agricultural assets, were damaged in attacks on port facilities and grain infrastructure along the Danube River in Odessa region on the 3rd and 4th of September. The humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, Denise Brown, condemned the repeated attacks on the Danube's ports and grain facilities, which have far-reaching humanitarian consequences for Ukrainian farmers, but also for people worldwide already grappling with rising food costs. Our humanitarian colleagues say that since the Russian Federation's decision not to extend the Black Sea Initiative, the Danube's ports and grain facilities are one of the main alternatives to ensure that Ukrainian food reaches the global market. This is vital to prevent higher prices and increased hunger. Turning to Sudan, we have an update on deliveries of humanitarian assistance in hard-to-reach parts of the Darfur region. In recent days, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs facilitated convoys to both North and South Darfur. This is the first time that OCHA has negotiated cross-line access to these areas. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that more than 20 trucks arrived in El Fasher, North Darfur's capital, on Saturday. They were carrying hundreds of tons of seeds from the Food and Agricultural Organization, as well as health supplies and medicines from the World Health Organization and the UN Refugee Agency. And last week, 3 UNICEF trucks carrying 50 metric tons of nutrition, health, water, sanitation, and hygiene supplies reached several localities in South Darfur: Gerida, Buram, Dimso, Karkada, and Marmosa. Since the 22nd of May, OCHA has facilitated the delivery of more than 2,400 trucks of humanitarian assistance. That's more than 110,000 tons of aid to different locations across Sudan. And our colleagues from the International Organization for Migration tell us that internal displacement from the conflict in Sudan has now topped 4 million people. IOM notes that in just the last week, more than 274,000 people have been displaced inside the country. Meanwhile, according to UNHCR, more than 992,000 people have fled across Sudan's borders. This brings the total displaced by the fighting to more than 5 million people. We have an update from Liberia, where our UN team, led by Christine Uma Tony, is boosting its response to national efforts to address food insecurity. This follows a recent report by the Food and Agriculture Organization showing that over 500,000 people are currently facing acute food insecurity in the country, with 21,500 people facing emergency food insecurity levels between June and August this year. The UN has been training almost 2,700 smallholder farmers in sustainable agricultural practices over the last 6 months, providing seed funding, assets, and equipment such as water pumps or improved rice and vegetable seeds. For its part, the World Food Programme, in collaboration with the Liberian Ministry of Education, is also reaching over 42,000 school children with meals prepared with locally produced food. The World Food Programme today said that it is being forced to drop another 2 million hungry people from food assistance in Afghanistan in September. This brings to 10 million the number of people cut off from its support this year in the country. Due to a massive funding shortfall, going forward, WFP will only be able to provide emergency assistance to 3 million people per month. In March, WFP had to reduce rations from 75 to 50% for communities experiencing emergency levels of hunger. In April and May, it was forced to cut off 8 million people from food assistance. For the coming 6 months, WFP needs $1 billion to reach a planned 21 million people with life-saving food and nutrition assistance, as well as livelihood support. We issued a note saying that the personal envoy of the Secretary General for Western Sahara, Staffan de Mistura, had arrived on Monday in Laayoune for a visit of Western Sahara. Thereafter, he is looking forward to conducting visits in the region and meetings, engaging all concerned ahead of the issuance of the report of the Secretary General to the Security Council in October. Today is the International Day of Charity, which was established with the objective of sensitizing and mobilizing people, non-governmental organizations, and stakeholders all around the world to help others through volunteer and philanthropic activities. The date of 5th of September was chosen in order to commemorate the anniversary of the passing away of Mother Teresa of Kolkata. Tomorrow, our guest will be Muhammad Ag Ayoya, Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General and Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator in the UN Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in the Central African Republic, known as MINUSCA. He will brief on the humanitarian situation, response, and challenges in the Central African Republic. So are there any questions for me before we turn to our guest for today? Yes, Deji.
Several questions. First, on Black Sea Initiative. Today, the Ukrainian media reported 3 vessels, Primus, Anna Teresa, and Ocean Courtesy, left ports from Black Sea, which they said it's a signal to break the embargo to export Ukrainian commodities by sea. Does the UN or the JCC in Istanbul have any information on this, these vessels?
Well, the JCC doesn't deal with this particular corridor. You're aware of the area of operations that they monitor. But from our side, we want to make sure that as much food assistance from both Ukraine and the Russian Federation can go out to the world, given the dramatic needs in the world for such food and fertilizer exports.
The Turkish president, Mr. Erdogan, said, "We believe that we will reach a solution that will meet the expectations in a short time." Has the Turkish side ever contact or share information with the UN on their meeting with President Putin?
We're aware of the meeting, obviously. We're thankful to Turkey and all countries who have been trying to help efforts to resolve the situation. We, of course, from our side, will continue with our efforts to do as much as we can to get Ukrainian and Russian food and fertilizer exports out onto world markets.
So no updates yet?
Given the nature of these talks, I wouldn't expect detailed updates about what's going on. Of course, work is ongoing, and we'll share what we can when it's useful to do so.
One last question, still on the topic. President Putin on Monday said that Russia was nearing a deal that could secure free grain to 6 African countries, including Burkina Faso, Central African Republic, Eritrea, Mali, Somalia, and Zimbabwe, which actually he said that he proposed that in July. Any new comments on the donation?
There's no new comments, but as you know, the Secretary General, in his remarks and his press stakeouts, has commented on this, and I would just refer you to what he said. Edie, and then Benno.
Further on the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and the meeting between the Turkish president and the Russian president very clearly rejected the UN's hope for a restoration quickly of the initiative, saying that demands that Russia has made have not been met. We know the Secretary General sent a letter to President Putin. What is the next step that the Secretary General is going to take?
Well, we're going to continue with our discussions, but yes, you're quite right that the Secretary General did send a letter, and in that letter, he outlined what he thought was a concrete way forward on implementing the relevant memorandum of understanding between the UN and the Russian Federation. And we will continue at our various levels to try to do what we can to move forward with this.
So he's going to specifically go and try and fulfill all of the measures that he outlined, or the ones that the Russian president outlined?
Well, he had concrete proposals that he outlined. We'll see what can be done to get those realized, but we are continuing with all our efforts through our various interlocutors. Yes,
Thank
Benno.
you. About DPRK and Russia, are there any comments from you about North Korea's leader reportedly traveling to Russia to discuss weapon supply to Moscow, which would clearly violate Security Council resolutions?
Well, we'll have to see what happens at the meeting once it happens. Obviously, if there's anything that is a matter of concern regarding the Democratic People's Republic of Korea's weapons activity, that would be an issue for the relevant Security Council Sanctions Committee. Yes, Kristen.
Thanks, Farhan. You talked about all the money that's been released from SURF for humanitarian reasons, and the fact that this is unprecedented. Can you expand on that a little bit in terms of why so much money is needed, why it's so underfunded, and kind of put it in perspective historically a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the basic thing is this is the most we've ever had to deal with. Part of it is because global humanitarian funding requirements are very large. $55 billion is a lot of money, and we're aware of that. We're aware that that takes a certain amount of strain on the international system. But the point is, because it's only 30% funded, we still need 70% of a large number of, $55 billion. That's a huge amount of money, and we can only put it in terms of the fact that this involves the threat of hunger, of disease spreading to millions of people around the world. More people than you or I or any of us in this room will ever see or meet in our entire lifetime by a huge factor. And we can't let those people down. Because we can't let those people down, we're using the underfunded emergencies window of our Central Emergency Response Fund more than we've done. And we're giving large amounts of money. The individual amounts, there's $20 million each going to Afghanistan and Yemen, for example. $9 million going to Burkina Faso. Those are the largest numbers, but I just gave out the names of all the various countries. But the numbers don't tell the tale that if we don't get all this funding, you'll have situations like the one I was just mentioning in Afghanistan, where we have a lot of people in need, and the World Food Program says they just can't feed them.
And just on Sudan, do you have any updated casualty figures or death toll numbers?
From since the start of the conflict, you mean?
Yes.
I believe we've had periodic updates on our humanitarian website, so I would just refer you to those. Yes, Margaret.
Farhan, on the SURF money then, so for instance, could some of the 20 million that they're giving towards Afghanistan go to WFP, or is it only for OCHA funded programs? Like, can you cross to agencies and funds and programs?
Well, yeah, some of this goes to different humanitarian operations that would include delivery of food, so that could help. But again, the World Food Program has made clear in its request that it still needs funding for its operations overall.
And can you tell us the status of the Joint Coordination Committee? Is it suspended, its work? Because, I mean,
No,
it seems the deal is collapsed, so what are they doing?
As you know, there are 4 partners to that committee from the United Nations, the government of Turkey, and the governments each of Ukraine and the Russian Federation. Not all of them are participating in activity now, but we continue with our part, and we continue to be present in Istanbul. And we'll see whether there's any way that that the activity of ships in the Black Sea through this initiative can be resumed.
And can I just get one more?
Yeah.
On Niger,
Yeah.
last week I asked about this proclamation, I guess, from the military junta about the UN isn't allowed and the NGOs aren't allowed to operate in so-called military zones, operation zones. You guys were trying to get clarity on this. Have you gotten any clarity?
Yeah, all I can say on that is the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is reaching out to the de facto authorities to find mitigation measures in order to maintain humanitarian assistance. Stefano.
Thank you, Farhan. About the MINUSCA's mission in Western Sahara. This is the first time that the MINUSCA is going in disputed territory there. So can you tell us a little bit more about this mission? Does the Secretary General expect something happening in the next days, or just for the report that you say for the next October? We know that just a couple of days ago, an US envoy also met with the Polisario Front. So there is anything relevant moving that we should know?
Well, what I can say is that Mr. de Mistura looks forward to further deepening consultations with all concerned on the prospects of constructively advancing the political process on Western Sahara in the course of these regional engagements. And he does plan to report on his visits and his engagements to the Secretary General and the Security Council in October. Yes, Deji.
Local media of Israel reported that 5 Palestinian women were forced to strip by IDF soldiers in Hebron during the raid in an apartment building, and which actually angered many Palestinians, and also some of the militant factions threatens for a response. Any reaction from the United Nations on this particular incident?
Well, certainly this needs to be investigated by the relevant authorities, and we would be opposed to any forms of collective punishment. Yes.
Are estimated for this year, and what the amount of donor funding has been received?
Well, like I said, the overall funding requirements throughout the world have surpassed $55 billion. At this point, the level of funding from all donors received is less than 30%. Okay, Kristen.
Farhan, on the Democratic Republic of Congo, does the Secretary General have any comment on recent anti-UN protests there, and also the government's crackdown on the protests, and now crackdown on the military leaders who crack down on the protesters? What does the Secretary General make of all this that's happening there, and what does it mean for the UN operations and the mission there?
Well, yes, we're aware of the significant loss of life from the demonstration that happened on the 30th of August. I believe we mentioned this in last Friday's briefing. Our peacekeeping mission there, MINUSCA, welcomes the news of a high-level government delegation in Goma to assess the situation. And the mission strongly encourages a thorough and independent investigation into the incident. We're also aware that 2 senior military people and 4 other defense and police officers have been arrested, and we're monitoring the court hearings that are now underway. And so we will continue to follow up on this. Yes, Alan.
Thanks so much, Farhan. May I ask you for the comment regarding the words of Turkish leader Erdogan, who said after the meeting with President Putin that basically he admitted that only 44% of wheat is going to Europe, was going to Europe through this grain deal, and only 14% was going to Africa. As far as I remember, UN was providing different numbers. How can you comment on Erdogan's words? Thank you.
Well, you have to remember that, and we've said this repeatedly over the past year, that the initial destinations do not necessarily indicate where the final destination of food is. Sometimes they would go to European areas for reprocessing and then move forward to other countries. Remember, these are commercial transactions, and so that's part of the regular process. The other part, and again, we've said this repeatedly, is that the significance of having these corridors open is to maintain a low level of world food prices overall. So the overall impact to global food markets is the main result of this initiative. And with that, let me turn to our guests. Okay, let me come over and sit beside you. So it's always good to have with us our guest at the Mosornu, the Director of Operations and Advocacy in the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And hopefully we shall shortly have on our screen behind us Gabriela Wyman, the Humanitarian Director for Save the Children Global, who is joining us by VTC, I believe from London. And they'll here to talk to you about the latest mission with the Humanitarian Emergency Directors Group to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Ms. Mosornu.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. So I've just returned indeed from a mission to the Democratic Republic of Congo with operations directors from Save the Children. Gabriela is online with operations directors from IOM, UNHCR, UNICEF, UN Women, and WFP, representing the broader IASC Emergency Directors Group. What we saw and heard in the Democratic Republic of Congo was shocking, heartbreaking, and sobering. We have seen that in the past 18 months, and alone the humanitarian situation in Eastern Congo has deteriorated to an alarming extent. It is frankly the worst situation we have ever seen, with around 8 million people in need of urgent humanitarian assistance in the provinces of North Kivu, South Kivu, and Ituri. 8 million people, that is the entire state of Washington State. In this country, DRC, 26.2 million people, more than 26 million people need food assistance. They are food insecure. 1 in 5 Congolese across the country need some form of humanitarian assistance. One thing that stood out very clearly to all of us is the issue of gender-based violence being perpetrated on a massive and distressing scale. In the first 6 months of 2023 alone, more than 35,000 survivors have sought access to services for gender-based violence across the 3 provinces alone, just the 3 provinces. Given the fact that only a fraction of survivors report gender-based violence, the number is likely to be higher. In displacement camps and sites around Goma in North Kivu, and Bunia and Komanda in Ituri, we met with families who've been displaced for months and in some cases for years. A good number of them forced to move from one displacement site to the next due to violence by armed groups that prevents them from returning home. These are people who've lost everything. And when they go in search of firewood, which is mainly the women and girls, they are at very high risks of rape and some form of gender violence. And we spoke to a few of these survivors. We heard a consistent message everywhere. People in camps require access to food, water, medical treatment, the basics of every dignified human existence. What they really want and consistently demand, every single person we spoke with wants peace and wants to return to their land. They want to return home. During the visit, of course, we had the opportunity to brief, to speak to the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs in Kinshasa and the governors of Ituri and North Kivu provinces where we visited. We stressed the need to improve protection of civilians across the board. We also reiterated the responsibility of national authorities to address the escalating cases of gender-based violence and to put in place measures to prevent this horrific sequence of events from happening, including heightening security measures around displacement camps and addressing issues of impunity. Despite these challenges, humanitarian action is making a difference in the Congo. So far, we've been able to respond to assist 1.4 million people. This is a fraction of what the number of people in need. I have 3 asks coming out of this mission. This is what we need to be able to do more. Number 1, protection of civilians, access, security. Number 2, funding. We've only received 1/3 of the amount of funds required to be able to respond at scale and at speed. And number 3, to repeat what the people of Congo have said to us in this mission, they want peace and political processes and solutions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We'll now turn to Gabriela Wyman, Humanitarian Director for Save the Children Global, who I believe is calling in from London. Over to you.
Thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not business as usual in DRC. As Adam was describing, DRC already has one of the highest numbers of displaced people in the world. It already has the highest number of food insecure people in the world. It already has the highest number of grave violations against children in the world. But in 2023, the number of internally displaced people grew by a further 1 million. So no, this is not business as usual. This is an acute crisis on top of an already supersized one. Behind every one of these staggering large numbers are individuals enduring immense levels of suffering. For example, I met this 10-year-old girl in Komanda in Ituri province, and she and her family had to flee when her village was attacked. She used to do very well in school. She used to love school, she told me. But now she's struggling to concentrate. She's still very afraid, traumatized, and absolutely scared that what happened to her can happen again. We are supporting her with psychosocial support, but it's not easy after everything that she has gone through. Vast mineral wealth has fueled war, displacement, and hunger, and it has created absolutely shocking levels of need. Particularly heartbreaking to see was also the impact on the Pygmy community, one of the last hunter-gatherer communities left on Earth. Not only is the outrageous level of violence displacing them, it's destroying their way of life for good. This community has lived in the equatorial jungle for thousands of years, taking from the land only what they need to survive, nothing more. But our hunt for cobalt needed for our rechargeable batteries and diamonds for our engagement rings brought the fighting to their doorstep, killing and displacing them so that we can have what is underneath their feet. We met with them in the displacement sites, struggling to survive, not enough to eat, an environment that's unfamiliar to them, and their children malnourished. Their rights completely trembled and no accountability. DRC is a country rich in natural resources and human potential, and it's critical to the world's climate change goals and energy transition future. But despite this, many Congolese are left behind. The scale of suffering is well beyond what we as humanitarians can address. There is insufficient funding even for basic life-saving needs. Our colleagues have to make impossible decisions every single day, whether to prioritize water or whether to prioritize shelter or medical support for the constant stream of new displaced people. But instead, we're often finding ourselves having to cut rations. These aren't trade-offs between luxuries. These are trade-offs between what is keeping people alive every single day. And as a result, even in longer-term displacement settings, children remain out of school for years. School is not a luxury for a child. It's life-saving. Without education, they will at best be put to work. But worse, they can be forced to join the fighters, and so the cycle goes on and on and on. Durable solution and development seem well beyond the hopes and dreams of the displaced, despite living on incredibly rich soil. As Adam mentioned, simply put, we need more money. More money to scale up the life-saving humanitarian interventions. But it's not going to be enough. What people really need is peace, and they need their government to step up and help them to return home safely, or else to provide them land so that they can resettle elsewhere and start anew. It is only through the lead responsibility of the Congolese government and the combined support of the diplomatic and the development community, the donors and the humanitarians that we can scale up the emergency response in Eastern DRC to save more lives and alleviate the hardship and the risks faced by those forcibly displaced from their homes due to conflict. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'll now open the floor up to questions. Please indicate to whom you're directing your question when you ask. Edie.
Thank you very much, both of you. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing, my name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. First, Ms. Worsthorner, could you clarify a figure? You said that the funding so far is 1/3 of what's needed. What's the amount needed? Secondly, you've said that the government needs to do a lot more to provide security, tackle impunity. What was their reaction, and what is the UN going to do to follow up on that? And thirdly, you called this shocking, heartbreaking, and chilling. You've traveled all over the world. How does the Congo rank in terms of global humanitarian crises? And on that issue, could you please also respond? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Edith, and good to see you. The first point on funding, we're asking for 2.3 billion US dollars. We have received $764 million so far, and we're grateful to the generosity of our donors for continuing to support the people of Congo. On your second point, thanks indeed. Congo is, the Democratic Republic of Congo is under some sort of emergency. So the governors of Ituri and of North Kivu are military governors who have troops at their disposal. So we spoke to them about ensuring that they continue to ensure that there's no, get more troops. That was the question that they asked, but of course it's beyond our mandate. We impressed upon them on the need to secure the population. They said they needed more resources to do that. On your point on accountability, this is, as you know, there's a mission in the Congo, and that they are engaged definitely with the government at that level. In the point about shocking, heartbreaking, of course, Gabriela will come in as well. I was in Congo in 2008. The numbers have increased exponentially, as Gabriela said. The suffering has increased exponentially. And I think the point that Gabriela made about a country so rich in natural resources and the population so poor is what is sobering and heartbreaking. My last point is when every single mother, Esperanza was widowed. She's got 8 children. The first one is in school, and then the rest are not. And she said, I just want to go home. I want peace in my country. I'll defer to Gabriela. Thank you.
Okay.
And just one follow-up. How does what's happening in Congo today compare globally with some of the other major humanitarian crises like Afghanistan, for example?
Gabriela, do you want to come in, or should I answer this question? Should I?
Well, let's turn over to Ms. Wyman, and then we can turn back to you.
Good.
Thanks. Yeah, please, over to you.
Over to me?
Yeah.
I can give you my perspective, ma'am. It's always very difficult to compare one crisis with another, right? Because the suffering of one person is the same as the suffering of another person. And these are human beings. But I can give you the answer in terms of scale, which I just did. The largest number of food insecure, the largest number of IDPs. I think last year, I'm not sure about this year, it had the largest number of newly displaced IDPs as well. Sorry, internally displaced people. Largest number of grave violations against children. But what is my biggest takeaway from this mission is people sitting on rocks, sitting on volcano. That's where they're sitting, outside of Goma. They're absolutely sitting on the ashes of the volcano. We are struggling to strike water for them. That's how desperate the situation is in the DRC. So is it the worst one? It's one of the worst ones I have seen, and I've been in a few places for sure.
Okay. Anything further to add?
I think Gabriela said it. No human being should suffer at all, and we are seeing a lot. It is the largest of everything, and it's worse. 1 million people displaced in a year. That is a lot of people. I wouldn't have anything else to add to that. Thank you.
Thanks. Margaret?
Hi, thank you, Margaret Bashir with Voice of America. To either of you, both of you, I'm just wondering how much the drawdown of MINUSCA is impacting protection of civilians, what people were telling you on the ground, because I know there is also some animosity towards the mission. So are people happy it's leaving, or are they worried that it's leaving? And who are the main perpetrators? Is it Codeco and ADF, or are you seeing the army participating in some of the gender-based violence? Are you seeing, we had heard M23 was back. What were you being told by the people you met? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I'll start, and maybe Gabriela can come in. Thank you so much, Margaret, for this question. Maybe 3 things. We focused on discussions on prevention. We focused on discussions with the population, with Esperanza, with Monique and their families on what can be done to prevent the situation that we're facing. I did not get into the who did what. It's bad enough that this is happening at scale. So I think and you're right, the armed groups, more than 130 armed groups in addition to those that you mentioned, and it's a proliferation across the board. What we focused on again was the need for first prevention, and then secondly, psychosocial support and medical support of women who have been violated. And the stories were absolutely horrific, and I didn't want to get into them, but transactional sex at 20 cents is what is being perpetrated in the camps. And that is, conversations that we're having with their families of victims, or the victims, survivors, I would say, themselves. The drawdown of the mission did not come up with the population that we spoke with, but it certainly was a conversation we're having with the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, and also with the governors at, as I said, a very militarized situation. 2 things came up very, very clearly. It is a sequential drawdown, because I think the mandate ends not tomorrow. We have some time. So the country team is really focusing on issues around contingency planning, about what would happen and what gaps need to be filled. The second thing is this protection of civilians mandate of the mission, and the need to ensure that the United Nations country team, as well as the INGOs, step up in issues of child protection, issues of children in armed conflict, and bring the necessary tools and the necessary agencies to fill this gap that will definitely happen. But to the population, again, the message was very clear. We want peace and we want to go home. Thank you, Margaret.
Ms. Wyman, anything to add?
I think the SRSG made it very clear when we were there that we need to prepare, that the country team needs to prepare. Their planning is for a drawdown. And as Adam was mentioning, there are a number of functions that the mission is currently undertaking, particularly around protection of civilians, but also some logistical support functions that we're going to have to start planning for to incorporate within the humanitarian side of the equation. My big worry, of course, is that there's already not enough money for either water or shelter. So, how are we going to incorporate additional functions? And will the funding that is currently with the mission, will that move over as well, or will just the responsibility move over, but not the funding?
Ibtisam?
Thank you. My name is Ibtisam Azim from Al Arab Al Jadid newspaper. I have two follow-ups. The first on the issue of psychosocial support for victims, and whether you are able to provide any, given the fact that you are not able to, in some cases or areas, not able to meet the basic needs. And the other issue also on the, you said that you need more access, etc. Could you be more specific and elaborate on that? Thank you.
Thank you. So let me start with access. There are different types of access in the Congo, this country that is so vast with very poor infrastructure. So sometimes we drove on roads that were extremely rough, even in the dry season. So there's everything between physical access, where you can't access the population because it's impossible to reach those places. We used helicopter, which is super expensive, to get to some locations. So there's the physical access, then there's the access related to insecurity. But through our efforts on negotiations with the armed groups, and we can negotiate with all armed groups except one, the ADF, but every other armed group it's possible to negotiate with them. And it's also sometimes quite difficult to ensure that we as humanitarians keep a distinct footprint and do not use armed escorts from the military. So access in physical access related to insecurity, and also the population's access to services sometimes because of logistics challenges. On psychosocial support, thank you very much, Ibtisam, for this question. Unfortunately, and we see it in many emergencies, emergency responses, the protection sector cluster is very rarely funded. I think if my memory serves me well, the GBV cluster is 5% funded, and also generally overall protection is about 10% funded. So we do what we can with the little we have, but I cannot, overemphasize and underscore the point that we need more funding to be able to do much more because of the impact, as Gabriela said, on the survivors of these horrific incidents. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Yvonne Murray.
Thank you. Yvonne Murray, RTE News. Question, it's really a follow-up on Edie's question. You responded to say that the military governors told you that they needed more resources. Do you agree? Is that the answer? Is that going to make a difference if they get more resources? And then with regard to the funding, $750 million have been received so far. Could you say where that funding has come from, which member states? And lastly, for Ms. Wyman, you mentioned the point about it being very rich resources, mineral resources wise. Is this something that you discuss with people on the ground? You mentioned, the scramble for diamond rings, for example. Is that something that you discuss with people on the ground? What kind of conversations do you have about the desire in Western countries and other places in the world for these kind of resources, and yet the people on the ground are so impoverished.
So first over to Ms. Wasorno, and then we'll turn to Ms. Wyman.
Thank you. I'm not a military expert, so I don't know whether the troops, the numbers that the governor gave us was enough or not. But I can comment on what the people we spoke with said. They said, for example, this is specific to Ituri province. Things were a little bit better and they felt a bit secure. So as to whether it's directly related to what the military are doing is a separate point. They said they needed more resources to be able to support, but then resources have been diverted. But I'd like to focus maybe on what the people said, and they were fine in that particular location. On your point about funding, it's the usual top donors. It's the US, it's Germany, it's ECHO, the European Union, also Sweden. So we have the usual top donors for most of these crises. And let's not forget that the US globally is 51% of global humanitarian response comes from this country, the US. We also have funding that comes from the Central Emergency Response Fund, which is a huge funding support for the Congo, because in other contexts, this is the Central Emergency Response Fund that has funding from different member states, large and small. So thank you. I hope I've answered the question.
Thanks. Over to you, Ms. Wyman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The issue on also like the richness of DRC, it's not the first time that this is being raised, right? And I refer you to the speech of the Pope earlier this year, because I think he said it best, and there's no need for me to repeat his words. But it's something that requires attention, right? And it's not just the people on the ground with which this needs to be discussed. This is a discussion that is required with our own member states, with our own governments, with our own population, and with our own private sector, because everybody is involved on that one. My other point on that one would be that the richness of DRC is not only what's underneath the ground. What is so striking is how lush that country is. Green, it's got the rains, it's got arable land. Pretty much the entire country is arable. But very, very little is being actually used for agriculture because of insecurity, because of land rights, etc. And there's a huge conversation to be had. It's very clear when you walk around there. I mean, you could buy a piece of land there yourself. You could happily live there. It's beautiful. It has all the potential for it to be a very thriving, developing context. But unfortunately, it is not. So yes, there are conversations that need to be had beyond the humanitarians. These are conversations for the diplomats. These are conversations for the politicians. These are conversations for the economists, the private sector. These are conversations for the government of DRC, and ultimately for the peace and the security of the population of the DRC.
Okay, thank you. Stefano Vaccaro.
Thank you, Stefano Vaccaro, Voce di New York. I just follow up on, again, when you say that you talked to who is responsible there to send the army to protect the civilian, and the answer was that they don't have enough funds. As a person, as an officer of the UN, did you, I understand that you are not a military expert, but did you try to convey, to tell them that there is a responsibility to protect, and if a state fails to protect its own people, then the UN, will have to take an initiative or something? I mean, did you give them this message?
Thanks a lot. I always like to go to the resolution 46-182, which talks about the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of a state, and of course the responsibility of a state to protect. Absolutely, those conversations were had. They were had by the SRSG, the Special Representative of the Secretary General, and the Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General, the Resident Coordinator, Humanitarian Coordinator. Very tough conversations are had with the authorities on an ongoing basis. Ours was just an injection and to reinforce these messages. The issue of protection was very clear, and I think the point about also impunity and stressing that those who violate the basic laws have to be punished. These conversations were had. We also had conversations about, there are statistics on, some of the progress made by deploying troops versus the removing troops from Ituri province to another province to support the war in that particular province. So absolutely clear conversations about the need for the government at all levels to ensure the safety and security of the population. These are conversations that we have with the governments all the time, and I think we don't fly in and just fly out. We hold. It's about having real conversations and truth to power when it comes to protection of civilians and using facts and the evidence base to have those conversations. The reason I talked about not understanding the troop issues was because I don't know whether 8,000 troops is enough or not. So I didn't want to get there, but absolutely. Thanks.
Thanks. And Ms. Wyman, if you have anything to add to that?
No, I'm not a military expert either.
No.
Yeah,
No.
I can confirm that. We've had conversations about the responsibility to protect and our role being auxiliary, as Adam describes, in relation to 46-182.
Christian Salumi?
You talk about the humanitarian situation being the worst that it's been. Obviously, there's been these anti-UN protests recently, and we've seen similar situations in other countries in the Sahel and West Africa, where people are frustrated with the UN or Western troops that are there. Did you get any sense of the stability of the government there? Are you worried that this will be the next country to see a coup? And how does the political situation affect the humanitarian situation? Are aid workers seeing any of the hostility that's being directed at peacekeepers?
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Should I? Thank you very much. I think one big date that is coming is elections in December, and it's all the conversations that were being had at different levels. When there are protests, as we had to divert our trip from Kinshasa, we were supposed to go to Goma, but we went first to Ituri because of the protests that were planned. The protests do disrupt humanitarian action because on that day, international NGOs, national NGOs, as well as the UN cannot move, and people who require and need our assistance on a daily basis are affected because of insecurity. So absolutely a direct link between insecurity and what the people need from us. That said, again, I have to be honest, the conversations in the camps were, we just want to go home. We just want peace. We don't care about the politicians. Everyone we spoke with was focusing on that. But of course, to the average person, peace requires a political solution, which requires security. But we didn't get into that. The mission is the special representative is very mindful of these conversations, and she is having them at the highest levels, inside and outside the country, at different levels with different member states who can influence differently. What we saw, maybe my last point on that, what we saw, the statement by the High Commissioner for Human Rights, or the Human Rights Mission in Congo, following the deaths, the senseless killings of 47 people on the day of the protests, that we called out as the United Nations system, that it is not right for civilians who want to protest against whatever to be killed the way they were. And this is where the mission's mandate really comes into play. But for us as humanitarians, the impact is certainly our inability to deliver assistance on a daily basis, and it did disrupt us. Our mission almost didn't happen to Goma. Thank you.
Ms. Wyman, do you have anything further to say?
Just to back up what Adam was saying, we heard when we ultimately did visit the displacement sites that the ability to pump water and to truck the water to the displacement sites was immediately disrupted as a result of the insecurity. So that means that people don't get water for a day. And knowing that already there is not enough water to go around for the number of people that are there, not having water for a day has immediate, quite dire consequences. So this is just an example.
Thanks. I see no further questions, so I would like once more to thank our guests, Eda Mosorno and Gabriela Wyman. Thanks very much for your briefings. There's no briefing by the President of the General Assembly's spokesperson today, but hopefully there will be one later this week. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Okay, so thank you for listening today, and let's leave it with this thought. Depending on whose eyes you're actually seeing it through, we're gonna see that that either the United States is one of the biggest contributors to actually producing humanitarian efforts around the world to helping people, and for whatever the reason, whatever the agenda is, that a large amount of that money that goes into the United Nations and to other projects around the world does come from the United States. And what isn't mentioned is also Canada puts up a lot of that same money. According to a lot of what we're reporting, that we see the Russian Federation as wanting to block a large number of these things when it came down to the Black Sea Initiative, which would distribute the grain from that region around the world and help control food prices and things. That we see that the Russian Federation walked away from the table and saying that the Ukrainian Black Sea ports were simply put distributing weapons, not distributing grain. So where this all sits is that a large number of people are left out in the cold. They're left without food, medication, and resources to even help them grow their own food in their own countries. So it's tough to say who is really the bad guy and the good guy here when there are so many different sides and ways of looking at things that no one particular country or group is absolutely right. And the bottom line is that all of us need to just collaborate and work together. And when we do so, wonderful things will actually start to happen. Thank you for listening to us again, and please find that subscribe button wherever it may be on your screen. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.